Pandemic certainly sidelined much of life over the last couple of years, but the real estate market kept booming. Will the trends extend into 2022? Joining me now is Compass Executive Vice President and Realtor, Mike Aubrey. Mike, what trends are you expecting to see in this new year?
Dagan, honestly, I think that we are going to see a continuation of this year. I think the real estate market is going to remain very strong. I mean, if you look at the effect of COVID on lots of industries, it's been a bad effect. It's been the exact opposite in real estate. I think that what we've seen is people are now seeing their home no longer just as a home, but as a place of work, as a gym, as a school. And I think that because of that, I mean, I hate to say it, it's been a heck of a shot in the arm for our industry.
Certainly here, and I hate to make everything about New York City, but New York City kind of reflects a lot of other areas in this way. People left the city at the beginning of the pandemic, but really last year you saw a surge of people coming back. Seemed to be anecdotally younger people moving back into the city, renting apartments and places to live. Is that still the case? How are the suburbs holding up in terms of sales?
I mean, listen, the suburbs are still doing great, but I think you're exactly right, Dagan. I think that any perceived exodus from cities has completely changed. I think that the reality is we still remain at a low inventory condition, both in the burbs and in our urban centers. And I think that there just is more demand than there is supply out there right now. I think one of the reasons that we've seen the rental market come back as strong as it has, specifically in New York City, is because there just isn't enough to buy. And I think that because of that, people have to have places to live. But any perception that the American city is gone because of COVID, well, it's just plain silly.
Brandon, jump in.
Yeah, I think what you hit on there is really important. The supply constraints that are driving a lot of these problems and higher cost problems for everyday Americans that can't afford housing the way they used to be able to. So I'm wondering, Mike, how much of government policy is playing a role in here? You talk about high tariffs on steel, aluminum, lumber, driving up construction costs, making it less affordable to build new homes. How much of that is driving this supply constraint that is fueling the housing crunch?
I mean, I think that supply chain issues are real. And obviously, there's a myriad of reasons why we have those supply chain issues, some of it based on governmental regulation, other just based on the fact that you don't have as many workers out there who are creating the things that it takes to build a home. And I think that you're exactly right. The American consumer is catching the brunt of this, in that it costs more to build a house now than it did 2 years ago because of those supply chain issues. In terms of whether or not that's dampening the industry, are we seeing it throw a wet blanket on it because of it? No. I mean, people still want to buy. I mean, what we really are in trouble with the building industry is that we should have been building about 1.5 million units a year for the last 6 or 7 years in order to be where we need to be right now. And really, we're closer to 1.1 million. I think that this is not going to go away. Now, do I think we're going to see the frenzy of 2021 this year? Probably not. But do I still think it's going to be a really, really good real estate market? I do.
What about the threat of higher interest rates? That could certainly throw a little bit of cool water on what's been an incredibly hot industry.
I agree. I mean, so let's look at even the last 48 hours and what's going on with the bond market. I mean, you've been talking about it all morning. Obviously, we've seen the bond market move up, specifically with regard to the yield on the 10-year Treasury. That sort of goes hand in hand with mortgage rates. And I think that we are going to see rates come up this year. I mean, in fact, I'm forecasting probably 3.7, 3.8 by the end of the year. But if you look at it historically, even though as rates rise and people lose buying power, it's still super low, comparatively speaking. I mean, listen, my parents paid 18% when they bought their first house. They would have begged for 3.7.
Right, but their house was also a fraction of the price. People always used to say that. I was like, yeah, I can point you to any house out in the suburbs of New York City that back in the, early 80s would have cost $100,000. Now it's into the millions of dollars.
Well, I mean, I agree. But remember, it's also an economy of scale. And ultimately, at the end of the day, though, I think you're exactly right. I mean, you've got a bucket full of money. You can either use the money to pay the bank or you can use it to buy a house. The more you pay the bank, the less house you're going to buy.
How expensive, what is the most expensive market that you're in or you're looking at? Is it New York City? I mean, maybe that's just an obvious question.
Well, I mean, I think that New York is super expensive, but I think that if you sort of peel that onion and you look a little bit deeper, look at the markets that have gotten extremely expensive, extremely fast. Let me tell you what, Austin, Texas. There are more millionaires in Austin, Texas right now because, make no mistake, Silicon Valley is no longer in California. It's in Austin. And I think that because of that, houses literally that were $800,000 2 years ago are now trading at $4 million. It's silly down there.
I agree, but don't say that to a Texan, even if you're talking about the People's Republic of Austin, as many Texans will call it. Mike Aubrey, good to see you. Thank you for being here.